let me know, because that's pretty quick.
We're going to call the special meeting tonight, April 16th, 5:30, to order. And this is going over our classification and compensation plan. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lyons.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor, members of City Council. I've got taking after Mr. Gore, I do have a short PowerPoint that's just going to quickly summarize. Just to warn you, I've only got 11 slides, so I did try to be brief. But you really just want to very quickly kind of go over where we've been. And as you can see on your agenda, there's a resolution for the adoption of the study that I'll also explain in detail, and then I'll leave plenty of time for questions from the council. So there we go. Make sure I get the remote control working correctly. Okay. So the 11 slides that I've got for you, I want to quickly go over the focus and framework document, the job analysis that was done via the JAQ, the market study. Some of the questions that we've received over the course of the study deal with pay progression and salary range overlap that we'll talk about in a second, and then the resolution as well. So going back to the focus and framework document, the council remember it's probably been over a year and a half ago, Bruce Lawson from the firm Fox & Lawson came and did kind of a workshop with City Council to talk about a classification and compensation study. They interviewed the City Council members one-on-one. We took notes about what you all were looking for in the study. And then in August of 2013, the focus and framework document was adopted by City Council. It had two major goals: to classify the work with a broad class structure, and goal number two was competitive total compensation that reflects both internal equity and the external market. Now this document was important. It included 18 elements, and the MAG report that we've delivered to you addresses all 18 items. We saw this as our mission, our marching orders about what we wanted to do, and it was really important that we establish this because we wanted to make sure we stayed focused and on target to what the council was looking for. Now, the focus and framework document was adopted and approved by the City Council before we ever selected our consultant. We wanted to make sure that the consultant that would be selected had the kind of experience and approach that was going to be consistent with what the City Council had asked for. So after a competitive selection process, the City Council did approve a contract with MAG, and this was the charge that we gave them. Goal number one in the focus and framework document was to classify the work. This is the job analysis that was done with the JAQ that took 14 elements on a 10-point scale, and every single city employee had the opportunity to fill this out. There was over 900 city employees that filled these out. And while that bar graph on the right-hand side may be a little bit small, what it illustrates is that we took all of the positions within the city and place them within 43 pay grades. Now, this is in comparison to the Burris pay plan that we currently have that has 240 individual pay ranges for those positions. So by following the focus and framework document, we were able to do this. Now, this gives us a structure for the future, and when we look about where we are today versus where we can go with MAG, this is a huge building block and a foundational piece for the city. This gives us a legally defensible system, and I think that's important to note. So that structure established with the classification plan is significant and is a great improvement over what we currently have. Each of those colored bars that you see, there's a 5% difference from one grade to the grade above it. That gives us that proportionality that is lacking in what we currently have. Secondly, we wanted to make sure we knew what the market said pay should be. Again, we developed a list of competitive organizations, cities, but it also included Consolidated Utility and the VA Medical Center and other places here in Rutherford County that we compete with. It included some of our peer communities, communities like Chattanooga, Knoxville, Collierville, progressive cities in Tennessee that we also look at for talent, and then the regional positions, which mirrored those communities in the Murfreesboro 2035 study, so that we could look at the market to say, what does pay look like for the city? They benchmarked 63 positions. The positions and the communities to be benchmarked were shared with a listening session of city employees and brought to City Council for you all to approve. So when we looked at the market, again, we took the lead from City Council, the communities to look at, and we feel it very much so gave us an accurate reflection of the market. Now, I apologize that this is a little bit small to see, but on the left-hand side, you see a box that says internal equity. That's where we looked at the job analysis questionnaires. And on the right-hand side of the graph is the external equity or the market. Now, MAG took a look at both of these. They looked at the JAQs and the hierarchy in terms of complexity of city positions. It looked at the market. And as Ms. Long explained when she was here last time, that's when they did the regression analysis to identify where jobs should be located, and it developed the pay grades. Again, this is a firm that's done this over 500 times in 24 different states. Again, a legally defensible, statistically driven, data-based approach to establishing pay for the city. One of the things that we also did, because we did put a focus on employee engagement, was we gave employees, after the plan was published, an opportunity to fill out an administrative review form. This was a process, again, approved by City Council. The administrative review form was completed by 173 full-time and 27 part-time employees. The most common administrative review form that was submitted to the city dealt with an employee that felt like their grade placement was incorrect, that they felt they might have been placed in a grade that should have been 1 or maybe 2 grades higher. We're going to look at that through review of the data, review of what the employee said. If we've placed them in the wrong grade, we're going to fix it. If they're placed properly in the grade, we're going to explain why that is. Now, I know when employees looked at this, they saw other positions in their grade that they may not be familiar with, but here's what I do know, that MAG, in looking at all of the JAQs, grouped people in grades that had a similar number of points. It wasn't well, I think I know what they do. They use the JAQ to place them in a grade. That was also reviewed by the supervisor. So if a mistake's been made, we'll move them to the correct grade. This is really important because we want to maintain the integrity of the plan. The market data is accurate. It's a reflection of what our peer competitors and regional communities said they pay. The JAQ, I believe, is accurate because that was done by the employee, reviewed by the supervisor. But we want to maintain that integrity. So if a mistake has been made in placement, there was a data entry error, we will fix that as well. Right now, MAG's been sent 149 administrative review forms for MAG to take a look at and send a response back to the city. So just kind of quickly summarizing what staff believes the MAG report does for us. Number one, it met the goals of the focus and framework. You all gave us a mission and a charge. We carefully looked at that to make sure that it was consistent with the focus and framework document, and we believe it does. Secondly, this was an employee-driven job analysis that we believe accurately reflects the work done by our city employees. We believe we've got accurate market data. And as you see in the document in Section 8, it provides over, on an annual basis, $2.3 million in increases in employee pay. There's a 2% across the board increase for all employees except those who are topped out. There's an adjustment to minimum. We saw some situations where the market said the minimum pay was X, and after the 2%, the employee was still below the minimum pay. We moved them to that minimum pay, again, to be consistent with the market. Secondly, there was an adjustment to maximum. Employees, there was a number calculated, a target for each employee to see they should, based on their days of service, have penetrated their range so far. If they didn't penetrate it as far as the target was calculated, we made an adjustment to that to correct that. I know some of the comments we've heard along the way talked about compression. There were 2 years where, because of the recession, we didn't have pay increases. That days allocated, days in your current position, helps spread that out, and what we believe is a very fair way because the same calculation was used for all city employees. And lastly, in public safety, there was an adjustment to step. The adjustments that were made above sometimes landed a public safety employee in between steps, so we moved them to the next highest step. So we believe this is a major improvement over what we currently have. It's based on what the employees said they did. It's based on the market, and we believe is a big step in the right direction for the city. Anytime you touch a pay study like this, we know there's going to be questions and comments and concerns. That's one of the reasons why we opened it up to all city employees. What we heard from MAG was that most communities have the administrative review process done by a supervisor or department head. That's who did the administrative review. But because we want to make sure we've engaged our employees and we've given them an opportunity to share with us their thoughts, we opened up the administrative review to everyone. Having said all that, though, when we've looked at pay and there's a focused effort on it, there have been two different situations that we've heard about from the council and from city employees, and because those questions have come up commonly, I felt it was important to touch on those here as well. Now, first of all, these two items, the pay progression and salary range overlap, have existed before the MAG study ever started. They've been here. We've had city employees who have worked upwards of 40 years with the city. So everybody's individual pay progression is based on their career with the city. When they were hired, the policies and procedures at the time, over upwards of a 40-year career. The decisions that were made about pay increases and promotions were all based on the policies and procedures that were in effect at that time. Those decisions were made by previous city councils, prior HR directors, and city managers, but HR has always prided itself on precision and making sure that we got it exactly right. And I believe our track record speaks to that. So we believe when we look at current salary, it was done for good and valid reasons for the policies and procedures at the time. The next comment or issue that we've heard about deals with salary range overlap. So let me speak to that for just a minute. The salary range overlap exists in the public sector. It exists in the benchmark communities, and it exists in Murfreesboro. I can't tell you when it started, but we've had salary range overlap for a long, long time. It's a commonly accepted practice in public sector. So the MAG report and the focus and framework document weren't ever designed or built to deal with salary range overlap. Now, there's three methods to eliminate salary range overlap in a broad sense. One is to reduce pay. That was in the focus and framework document that we weren't going to reduce pay, and that's not our recommendation. Secondly, you can look at laying pay ranges end to end, but when we looked at that, and I've had one-on-one meetings with the city council, we saw that the salary ranges went over market by substantial amounts, over $200,000 at the top end of the scale, and that's not defensible. At the end of the day, we all recognize that taxpayers will support our employees being paid, what the market says, but when you lay the ranges end to end, it causes problems. Thirdly, you can lower the top-out pay, and that doesn't feel right because the market said a job ought to pay a certain amount, and if we shorten the top-out amount, then that can cause problems because we're off market. But having said all that, having listened to some of our department heads, having listened to the council, if salary range overlap is something you want us to take a look at, Mayor, city council members, we're willing to head off in a separate review of salary range overlap. I can't sit here and tell you today that we can completely eliminate it, but that wasn't ever supposed to be fixed in MAG. But if that's an issue and a concern for you, and I've heard from several department heads that they believe that that can cause problems where some employees may be supervised by someone and they're making more than their supervisor, we're willing to look at that. But that's a separate study altogether.
That was my question, Mr. Lyons. That would be a separate study and not part of this particular document that we're reviewing tonight.
Now, another way you could look at it would be, right now in one of our public safety departments, the market has defined minimum pay for a police officer and maximum pay for a police chief. That's the territory that the market said police pay should fit. Murfreesboro's got 8 ranks that we're trying to fit into that real estate. That's why you've got the overlap. If you try to shorten all the ranges, then people top out more quickly and it's inconsistent with the market. So a possibility, I'm not making this as a recommendation, a possibility would be, what if you had fewer number of ranks in that defined territory of minimum police officer pay to maximum police chief pay? There's significant legal and personnel issues that come along with an analysis like that. But if that's what you all want us to take a look at, we're more than happy to do a review like that. I don't know what the results might be. I don't want to hold out any promises, but we're willing to look at it. And I think if that's what you all want us to look at, by all means, your staff can do that. But it's separate and apart from the MAG study.
A lot of comments I received are about overlapping in pay. Would you have an estimation on how long this would take?
No, sir, not at this
6
point.
months?
There are some pretty significant legal issues that would come along with something like that. Here's what I can tell you, Mayor and Council, and it's a credit to the HR department, our department heads, and our office. We've worked to make sure that the MAG report is as accurate and precise as it possibly can be. If we're going to come back to you with a review on salary range overlap, it's a very complex issue, one the city's had for decades. This didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen starting with your terms of office. This has been around for decades. So if it's been created over decades, to correct it is going to take some time. And I don't want to sit here and give you a date and tell you who's going to help us do that, how long it's going to take. But I can tell you that we would work on that with the same amount of effort to be accurate, precise, and in the context of the rest of the organization as well.
Another question I have, if I may, Mayor. I perceive this as a living document and not passed, put on the shelf, and never looked at again. It's going to be reviewed, and periodically, maybe once every 2 years, you'll have MAG redo some more research for you. Now, I don't know if that's in the contract or not, but that's a safeguard and a double check to make sure that we're doing what we want to do. But as a living document, you're looking at policies and procedures, I won't say every day, but you're looking at personnel policies and procedures that in the past may have caused a problem, but they're no longer part of that anymore, so hopefully that problem won't be there.
Sure. And what I would say to that, Mr. Young, is that when those decisions were made by prior city councils, they did the very best job they could with what they knew, what the law was at the time. Sometimes the policies changed because the laws changed. Sometimes there's a Supreme Court ruling and we've got to make a change. So the decisions of the past city councils, they made for the reasons they felt were best at that point in time. And like anything else in your business, in your personal life, or on this, as you go down the road, things change and you try to continue to get better. So there will be some policies and procedures that we're going to need to take a look at, and it is a living document. Because if this is adopted a year from now, there may be a city employee whose work has changed. But what we'll have is a vehicle to analyze that in an equitable manner, because it's going to involve starting with the JAQ. Complete the JAQ today, and let's see where it lands on the scale. We'll do the same sort of regression analysis to see where it's at, because that'll be consistent with every single city employee when the plan was established and done in the same set of calculations in a way, I believe, that'll be more equitable than we've ever had before.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Mayor, I did have one other slide, I believe. Let's see if we can go. Okay. What I wanted to do is just very quickly, summarize the resolution that's in your packet. Let's get a little small here. I'm going to have to look closely here. So what Resolution 15-R-10 says is that there are no pay reductions from current salary. That was in the focus and framework document, that after the study would be adopted, no one's current salary would be reduced. This is also a transition plan. This transitions us from a system that we've had since, I believe, 2002, and moves us into the MAG study. It also would approve sections 4.0 to 8.0 of the report, with a few exceptions. The first exception was there's a substituted corrected school traffic patrol sheet that was included in your packet. There are tipped employees in golf would receive minimum wage plus tips. Thirdly, the effective date for time and current position calculations would be done as of May the 3rd, 2015. You also had attached to your report a list of employees where the day and current position was incorrect. So we would need to correct those so everyone was treated the same way. The resolution also establishes the timing of the adjustment to individual compensation based on the payroll cycles of their department, and they're detailed with the dates in the resolution. It describes how the hourly rate of pay for non-exempt employees would be calculated. It also includes a section that says the city manager would be authorized to change compensation to correct errors in the approved administrative review form corrections. So in other words, after the plan is adopted, if MAG sends us back an administrative review form that says they should be moved up a grade, I'd be authorized to make that change. And then it also maintains steps for the transition plan, but consideration would be given in the future to go open range in fiscal year 16. We know the culture here has been that public safety has had steps. As we discussed last time, I believe that having steps reduces your flexibility to grant pay increases that are something different than 2.4%, and I believe that would be a positive step. But in terms of transitioning in the plan, the placement on step would remain. And I'd also like to call out that Section 2 of the study has some suggestions for future promotion, demotion, and salary changes, but they are not part of your approval. Staff, my suggestion to you was, if you adopted the MAG report, now we've got a fixed target to write the promotion, demotion, and salary change policies that would come back to you for approval. So that's a quick summary of Resolution 15-R-10. I know you're going to have some questions, but that would conclude my 11-slide short PowerPoint, Mayor.
Before we get into questions, I would want you to know Darren Gore's PowerPoint slides are better than yours.
I agree.
Can we vote on that?
I mean, I just call
I
it like
agree.
call it like I see it. So. Hey, Rob. Mr. Lance.
A couple of questions. I don't know where to really start. As it relates to one of those slides up there, you mentioned 3 ways that you might be able to work on some of these things, and I agree that perhaps it could be a separate study. I'm a little worried that it would be another year and a half, and we may never, it would be difficult to really follow through on it. But I think we obviously need to look at it. I don't necessarily agree that there are only 3 ways to deal with it. And perhaps MAG can come up with some ideas, but, we talked personally one-on-one yesterday, and, I think we discussed the idea that, there's 3 different ways you can move somebody's range. And the 2 that you indicated up here, well, we could lower their maximum, which everybody looks at and goes, boo, we don't want to do that. The other way you could perhaps get the same exact result is to raise the minimum. From a standpoint of, you could pull both of them in, you could lower the maximum, or you could raise the minimum. So there's a third way that you can change what those ranges look like that you didn't happen to mention. But, perhaps MAG can can come up with some ideas, or someone else that we think is better qualified to do something like that. But one of the questions that I have is, can we come up with an idea of what the cost would be to the city? And I want to make it a very specific question, which would be, what would it cost the city if in the beginning, when the framework was written, when everybody said, we don't want anybody to go backwards, if part of that framework would have also been, we don't want our maximum end of the range to go down. You guys provided us with that data yesterday, that there are 30 positions, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 78 people, I think is what it said. Yeah, 78 people have gotten a maximum that has been lowered. I did some rough numbers on my own, just tried to locate. I found probably half of them. And, it's typically a $1,000 reduction or a $2,000 reduction. There are a couple of pretty big ones, $5,000 that I found. My curiosity is, out of the number of people that are actually at those maximums is pretty low, is a pretty small number from what I found. And I wonder if we said we don't want to reduce those maximums, if that would be part of the framework of this, because I think the essence of the framework that was built 18 months ago by saying we don't want anybody to go backwards, or we don't want anybody to lose pay, is that we don't want anybody to go backwards. And I think if somebody has taken a job and they have been given a range that says, hey, this is what your potential is in the future, this is what your career path can look like, that we may want to consider not altering that for our current employees who are in those current positions. I think the cost would be very, very little to the city in today's terms, and I recognize that there would be some future additional costs to that too, and I'm not exactly sure how to say, how do we quantify that? But I think that would be really important for us to look at.
I think
I know it gets us out of market a little bit, but soda's not going backwards. Soda's saying.
Would it be an option, and maybe this is what you're saying, that would be for the few existing people that we have, that we say, look, we're not going to lower, but here's what the market is for.
I don't know. I think that's probably a Susan. Maybe is that maybe a legal
in
issue?
Essence,
Yes.
you're in essence the people who we would. We would almost grandfather the people who were thought what their range was, but any new person that comes in after that, this is what the range is.
Right, you could do that, either grandfathering at what it is today or grandfathering what it was when they came, if the concern is that they might not have come. For some people, the maximum has gone up considerably since they took the job. But so I think you could certainly have staff study all of it. It would certainly be possible to structure a policy and a program that would consider both possibilities.
Okay. I just kind of throw it out there. Of course, I'm just one of us, but that might be something that I'd like to consider if you guys would be interested in something like that. I don't know how to go about doing that as it relates to plugging it into this equation, but that's one thing that popped into my mind.
And I understand what you're saying, Mr. Lance. I know this is one of the sensitive parts of this, and we certainly respect the hard work of the employees that are in that situation. But I think I have to say, just the market has established what the maximum should be. And while I understand, the employee's concern and certainly understand exactly where you're coming from, Mr. LaLance, part of what, I see when I look at compensation issues, that it's not just the person who's standing in front of you, but it's the ripple that it creates to the position next to the one we're talking about and the one next to it. That the market now is different for a couple people, even though what we saw was the number should be lower. It's the council's decision, but I do feel like I need to point out that we're getting off market, and we've really tried to work hard to stay on market with this. But
the range that we had previously was somebody else's market, Burris's. So your argument would be that MAG does a better job of studying the peer cities than Burris, and that may be true, but the reality is, Franklin's market is different. Chattanooga's market is different. The company that they hire to do their pay study comes up with a different range than our company that we hire to do our pay study. So it's not. I don't think it's quite as specific as that. And I think if we're going to have our hands in it by saying nobody goes backwards, we've already got our hands in it. We are. I wasn't technically here when that happened, but the council has altered the market because people would have lost money, and they didn't. They would have gone backwards.
It's a great point to bring up, particularly when you look at maybe comparing and contrasting the Burris market versus the MAG market. One of the 4 types of adjustments in the MAG study is called an adjustment to minimum. If you talk to folks who are in compensation, they will usually tell you there are 2 different types of adjustments that relate to the minimum and the max of the range. An adjustment to minimum is called green circling. A freezing at the maximum is called red circling. It's a very common practice. And so what you do is when you assess this is what the market is, then you make policy decisions around whether or not you want to adopt green circling and red circling decisions. Because also in this study are a number of employees who would otherwise not be touched in the adjustment to minimum if you adopt the thinking and the strategy of both the red and the green circling. But the question deals only with the red circling. I would suggest that this is a far more comprehensive approach to the Burris methodology because that was never discussed.
I think that's a good point that Mr. LaLance made. The money that we have put in the study and the results we have gotten is, I think it's very important that we as a council look at all angles. I can see where Mr. LaLance was coming from on that, and the market, like you said, we have to look at our market here in Murfreesboro also. That was a very interesting point you made, Mr. LaLance, and I think we need to look at that because I think we need to take our time and look at this study in depth because I personally don't see the city spending this kind of money before 10 or 15 more years to do another comp study. So I think it's very important that we do stop and look at every angle. I can see some parts of the study where instead of maintaining our employees, we're just going to be fattening frogs for snakes. In other words, we're going to be training our employees, and then they're going to go up the street or another state and be well trained and make better money. So I kind of like what Mr. LaLance is saying. Let's maybe take a look at it. That's a good point you made. I can see more angles coming out of this study by what you said. I kind of like that idea personally.
I think one of the things I've learned after going through a lot of this, that you really have different piles of things. You've got the plan, which gives us our ranges and our compensation. And then you've got policies and procedures that dictate how that you follow that. And the one thing, I had it circled, and I guess it's not going to be part of what we're talking about right now, but it's the promotion policy. It's not going to be part of what we're looking at. And I think that's one of the key parts when we're talking about overlap, that if you were to break our organization up, we've got 70% that are in a certain area as far as able for promotions, and you've got 20% that are in middle area, and then 10% that are in supervisory department head positions. And what I see and what I would like to request that we work on when we promote into that, what I would say middle management area, I don't see the range being enough to where we're getting people away from where they came from. And, you know, I think that's, in my opinion, in looking at this whole thing, when we talk about overlap and we talk about all of those things, you have to incentivize people that if they're going to take those positions, and I get that we have a lot of people who, if a position comes open, there's a lot of people who apply for them, but what I want to make sure is that the people who are applying for those positions are the best people that we can get, not just we've got a bunch of people who are applying. So what that means, instead of if it's 5% or if it's 7.5%, that I would rather us see how we get that person who's taken those first 2 or 3 promotions, that we get them further away from where they're going to go. Now, what that means, they may top out quicker on a time frame into that next position, but as it stands right now, if you're use a firefighter, for example, if you're a firefighter, you get promoted to driver, then you get promoted to captain. Well, theoretically, you may get to a point, if you're promoted, that you don't ever get to the top end of any range. And what I think our goal is for those positions, that we get them promoted and we get them to those top positions. Now, it may take, if we've got somebody who here's 20 years, they get promoted and they become a captain, then I would think that we want to see that they're up at the top end of those ranges. And that's where you look at the structure that we have set up now. If you're promoted from one position to the next, there's not that big of a gap to keep where they're moving ahead. So I really want to see how we determine what that promotion policy is. That's not going to fix on where we are right now. I mean,
And I believe that's part of a salary range overlap analysis, that it's not just the ranks, but it's the amount of the promotions and how all that works. All of these things are so tied together, and what you think is one move starts the next. There's really 3 more things that can happen up and down the organization, and that's what we want to make sure that we're very careful with if we would decide to make a change like that.
Because the issue with doing that is if you promote someone from a position to the next one, and we've got a higher promotion policy that was in place at the time for the new person, then all of a sudden they're catching up with someone who's been in that position so, you know, we're helping in the future, which I think is what really we're looking at. So that's one of my questions I had, or more of a comment that really would like to see that is that's an issue.
Our policy, just to clarify that, I think he's talking, are you on page 14?
Page 15, item B1.
Okay. All righty. Yeah, that's the difference. Okay. Never mind.
Sure.
Would that not make people top out too quickly?
I don't know if it,
And then they'd be stuck again?
I think that's obviously going to be would you rather go backwards 2 steps when you get a promotion, or would you rather top out quicker?
Well,
I think you'd rather top out quicker.
I agree with that, but I don't know if anybody's going to go backwards. They may not go as much forward as they want
In
to.
steps, not in pay, but in steps, and which means it extends the time it takes you real significantly. You have a couple steps backwards. I know in public safety where the step system, you take 2 promotions, you back up 4 steps. If we're on 16 steps, we're talking +4, and how long is it ever going to take you? You're never going to make it.
and that's where
to top out ever anyway.
I think that's where sometimes it gets muddied, that when you see those steps, you immediately think, well, that's years of service. You know, it's not years of service.
Right.
It's a step. But what you don't want to see is if someone takes a promotion, that they're at step 6 on one level, and then they go up and they go back to step 4 or 3, and there's not that big of a spread to make it where you're like, hey, I got a promotion.
All right, well, the promotion's always going to be a percent of pay increase. The step number I know gets looked at, but it's really what's happened to my paycheck. The questions that you're asking here now really, I think, help illustrate why the classification system in the MAG report is huge for us. Right now, when we've got a promotion policy, but we've talked about examples where employees got promoted. One employee got a 5% increase, the other one got a 9% increase. But we're going to change that with MAG because of the classification system. The suggestion in the promotion policy here, I don't know what it'll look like when we bring it back to you. But what they're saying is that you get 5% for the first pay grade you move up, 2.5% for every pay grade above that you go up, with a cap of, I believe, 15%. Now there's a structure. There's a guide that when you get promoted from one grade to another, you can count the number of grades you go up. We'll calculate the percent increase per grade that you approve, and we'll know what they're going to be, the new salary will be. That gives us the kind of structure that I think we need, we want, and we deserve.
What would be, as this is written now, what would be the minimum if someone's promoted that they would receive?
They would be promoted to one grade above where they're currently at. It would be a 5% increase.
Okay.
If they went up 2 grades, it would be 7.5%. If they went up 3 pay grades, it would be 10, and so on and so forth. It suggests a cap here of 15%, but we may want to look at that to see how do we want to handle that. Again, that'll be your decision. We'll come back to you after we huddle with Human Resources, Legal, and our leadership team. But that gives us the kind of structure that we have right now. Right now, if someone was getting promoted from one position to another one in the city, we don't have that kind of guide.
I'm kind of getting totally confused now, but does that 7.5% that's written in our policies, is it still going to apply? Like if...
About waiting a year?
Yeah, if your promotion is like 7%, 7.5%, you won't get anything because it reached that threshold and you're going to have to wait a year before you get anything. Is that still applying here?
Ms. Scales-Harris, I think when we would bring a new policy back to you, I think that would be something that we would put a spotlight on and try to see what would be a best practice. Now, one of the challenges that we've had to live with for a long time, and it will change on October 1st, is we did not have a human resource information system. So making pay changes throughout the year would have been very cumbersome for us. But that's all going to be automated now. So we could look at the promotion, you wait a year, but then you get it, not wait till the next July 1. So we're going to have some options, Ms. Harris, is the short answer to your question. We want to try to get it as right as we can and give ourselves some flexibility. And if part of those policies have caused problems, the software, I think, can help us administratively fix that.
When will we get the results back from the 130-something we sent back to MAG? Because I think it'll have a great impact on our study here. When will we get the results back from that?
Well, they estimated about an hour for each one, and while you're on that subject, that was not part of their contract. I believe it would be fair to compensate them for the time they put into that. But they estimated for about 1 hour per administrative review. But I want to make this part clear as well. There's going to be requests for reclassifications and changes, as Mr. Young put, because this is a living document. This window to ask for a review, we're going to have that through the life of a plan like this. So next year when we get ready to do budget, someone's job may change. We'll have to go through that same process. What I believe the plan sets out is that framework, the structure, and the decision process. But everybody who was placed in a grade right now was placed based on the JAQ and the external market analysis to put them in a spot. The mechanics of that haven't changed. Even though someone's filed a review, we're going to walk them through that same process, and it's going to generate an answer.
I'm back to the last question on the pay grades and the raises. I'm trying to go through here, and I'm not sure if I'm in the right section or not, but I'm on page 95. And by the way, I think there's 2 section 3.0. So if you're trying to get 4.0 through 8.0, I don't think it's going to work out. But if that is the section that we look at that's going to actually tell us where everybody is, where they're, which grade they go to. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That's the classification
So
plan.
there's the first section that goes vertically. What's the difference in that versus right behind that where they're going horizontally? Sorry, that's just for unified? No?
Well, it's shown two
Section
different
4 and
ways.
5, what are the differences?
Yeah, well, there's one of the sorts is sorted by the proposed pay grade. Section 6.0, starting on page 114, lists the classification plan alphabetically, but the data is the same.
What I was looking for, let me just kind of tell you, as we were talking through that, I was trying to figure out if you're a police sergeant, I always get the sergeant and lieutenant mixed up as far as which one is the higher rank, but if you're taking that promotion, I'm trying to figure out how many pay grades apart are they? That would be a
Two.
211
to 213.
Okay, and so typically, let's just say, is that,
Can I get you to show
Tell
us
us what page you're on.
how that you?
93, it'll show you on 93.
Okay. I'm get confused because there's about 493s.
yeah. Okay, so what that says is basically a firefighter 1 and 2 got put in the same classification. That's why all of those firefighter 1s had such a big jump, and same thing with police officer 1 and 2, right? The 1s had the biggest jump because they got put in the same classification. Is that basically what happened?
Police officer 1, police officer 2, and firefighter 1 and firefighter 2 were not considered promotions. They were really tied to our step plan, but the job was the same. There was no promotion. There was
But
no
they got
waiting a year.
The big adjustments is what I was talking about, the ones that were 1s because their range changed. Never mind. Basically, what we're saying here is a firefighter goes to a fire driver. That's a 2-step increase, which means we would expect a 7.5% or about a 3-step move, right?
That sounds right.
And then police officer straight to sergeant. That's actually a 4-step, a 4-grade move, so that's going to be a 10% based on the,
Yes. If you use the same,
yeah, the
Same
5
ownership.
plus 2.5 plus 2.5, right?
yes, sir.
And are all the ranks listed right here? Is that all? Are they all included, or just the ones that we measured? Is that, I hadn't looked back through here. I'm sorry.
That's,
That's all right.
yeah, that's-
Should be
Okay.
them all.
those are the non-exempt positions
Right.
in
Yeah.
public safety.
Yeah, gotcha. That's what I'm. Yeah.
You got the command staff that's under the unified. Command staff is in unified. Is that right?
Yes.
And now I'm gonna dovetail on your 7.5% thing. If they got an adjustment to minimum or whatever kind of an adjustment it was, just an adjustment to market, and it's larger than 7.5%, will it throw them into that category as a typical 7.5% raise would, where they're not eligible for the next raise, or is this going to be separately?
Yeah, one thing that, if you look in the resolution, there's a suggestion that the current policy 5003, which deals with promotions in the employee handbook, is suspended so that we can get out and carefully review, first of all, did we meet the 18 components of the framework document? Because you're right, if I had to now think about, does the 7.5% policy apply, it sort of deteriorates the message of the whole study. So the resolution clearly says that is suspended, and I think Mr. Lyons has indicated we're going to get back to you after we look at MAG's proposals on the policies.
And that goes to the fact that it's a living document. You're reviewing this all the time.
Yes.
So corrections could be made at not any time during the process or the after process.
Well, certainly if they involve policy changes, we would come back to
Yeah,
council.
that's what I was
Absolutely.
wondering. Policy
Yes.
change.
Yes.
But I guess if we get it right, at the beginning, we won't have to go through a lot of changes. I mean, I have so many thoughts going through my head here. We have to get it right. I think, and time constraints, I understand that, but when someone makes a comment, then that has my mind going back here. I'm trying to understand the new study. This is one of the hardest things I've had to understand since I've been on the council, but I'm learning. But I want to be able to be comfortable with this once I've learned it. This new study, to me, is not giving an incentive to our employees to where they can be promoted. Am I making sense? In other words, because I think I asked this question to the MAG people, what incentives do we have to offer our employees to be promoted? And the only thing, well, what I can see from this, and I could be totally wrong, is that in order to really set yourself up for a promotion, you almost have to go to another department or go in another class. Now, speaking of the classes, like in one category that I was looking at yesterday, we have, like, I may say, okay, I'm misclassified. I feel like I'm misclassified. And you say, okay, let's take a look at it. And then you show that I am misclassified by, let's say I'm a clerical. I'm just top of my head, clerical. Yeah, you are, Ms. Gales, Ms. Harris, you're misclassified. So instead of moving me to another class, you're keeping me in that same group, but just giving me another title. Based on the classes that we have, I guess we want our employees, I know everybody's not going to be happy. I know that. I know that. But out of this study, I want everybody to understand the process. And I'm not understanding the process in that what incentives does this new study have for an employee to be promoted? I mean, what do they have to look forward to? Am I making sense?
Yes, you are. It's a good question.
Yes, yes. And I think job analysis is the easiest answer, because job analysis gives the city the opportunity to now appropriately classify the work as opposed to paying the person. The other thing, and if you look in Section 2, there's some pretty good language about what is a reclassification and what is a promotion. I welcome and look forward to that discussion, as Mr. Lyons mentioned, with City Administration, Human Resources, and Legal, because oftentimes our supervisors are confused about what those distinctions are. And certainly if an employee gets to the end of their range and then their supervisor asks that they be reclassified for the purposes of increasing their salary, that's not really a true reclassification. Maybe my job has changed so that, I do have in my current title an opportunity to earn more. So reclassification is also an item in the policies that we will be reviewing. So that also works in the advantage of the employee to understand that it won't be arbitrary. In the focus and framework document, this council asked for a reclassification process to be congruent and to continue past this study. This is what Human Resources is going to be able to do, so that when we start to talk about performance management and even succession planning, an employee will be able to lay out steps in terms of where they want to be more clearly as it results to the job analysis of the different positions that are tied to their JAQ in the market. So reclassification is really a good thing to talk about in your policies as to what it means and what it does, because unfortunately, some employers have used it as an opportunity to get more money for their employees when they're at the top of the range.
Mr. Yeah.
One of the incentives I would like us to work on in our policy is an educational incentive. We should pay a little more, or a one-time stipend or something for a person who gets an associate's degree, if they get their BS degree or they get their master's degree. Even though it may not enhance them in their particular job, such as maybe a fireman. But the better educated our workforce is, the better that we all will be. And that's one way to incentivize our people. And I think that is not in our policy now, but I think it should be a policy that we should carefully examine.
Look at that.
Let me chime in on something, how I look at this, because I remember the Burr study before I took my sabbatical. And, you know, there are some really good things about what this document that's before us, and that it does look at how we define the job that our employees are doing. And the good part of it is that we have begun to identify common work descriptions, and it will give us that place to move forward from. The difficult process that we're dealing with now is this is a moving organization. This organization doesn't stand still while we do this. This organization is developing, and it's a moving target to some degree, and trying to establish the place that we grow from or that we're going to move forward from is difficult. So, you know, to that extent, I really want to applaud everybody for taking the time to look at internal equity and the way that we looked at comps and peers and regional communities. But the most important thing we do kind of points to what Rick's point is, establish where the market value is. And, you know, in having the discussion with you and Glenn, it's a mathematical formula to some extent. After we've done some research to get input from our employees through our JQs, looking at the figures that come. But the difficult thing is establishing where that point that is market value. And we're leaning upon the consultant to tell us what is market value. I'm kind of coming to recognition that maybe not just assuming that we don't want that low range, but what impact would making sure that we don't adjust that maximum range might be an acceptable way to adjust this particular way we look at the salaries. Because to some degree it has to be our community, our organization, not just the antiseptic mathematical formula that we plug in the figures. And that may be another consideration that uniquely considers where we are as an organization.
Well, let me try to answer the question, Mr. Shacklett, because I believe what you just described is exactly what's in the report, and let me try to explain why I believe that. The market data came from the benchmark communities, from the HR departments where they reported the pay for their organizations. So I believe we've got accurate information about what the market said. I also believe we got accurate information from what our employees said they did in the JAQ. The regression analysis that was done is how they blend the two of those together, so it is unique and specific for Murfreesboro. You see, the market established, what other folks are paying, but what the regression analysis does is, in the point calculations for these positions, it said this is where it fits relative to Murfreesboro. A position in one organization may fit higher in that organization than it does fit here. That's why they customized it for Murfreesboro to a high degree of accuracy. MAG didn't just stick their thumb up and stick their thumb out. They had a great deal of precision so that it was custom for the city of Murfreesboro. This wasn't off the shelf. They absolutely customized it for our
But we made the
organization.
consideration that they weren't going to drop salaries. What I'm saying is, what Rick, I think's point was that we wouldn't affect that maximum range as well. I think, is that what you were saying?
My suggestion was that we would look at the cost of not reducing those maximums, and that would be something that I think we should be willing to, or I would be willing to consider, is not reducing those down to what MAG's market study showed. I mean, one point I'll say about what you just mentioned, I mean, I hesitate to think that MAG, I know they did a lot of work and there's a lot into it. I'm going to just say that once and it's done. I don't want to just be poking holes in it, but that's our job, is to try to see where the holes are and point them out and try to fix them. I doubt very seriously if MAG made adjustments for a police officer here versus a police officer in wherever else, let's call it Collierville, as it relates to, how many calls do they make on a daily basis? How fast is the city growing? What number of calls are they expected to make 6 months from now, 1 year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? There are differences that probably were not taken into account. And so that's why I think we have the capability and it would be the correct thing for us to do to add some non-antiseptic, sterilized
It's a formula.
formula.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, and this council has done that with the Burris plan. Think about the years that I've been here. You've approved employees who have been topped out, additional consideration
Right.
based on the Burris range. Ms. Long sat here recently and said the same thing. That is absolutely a good compensation practice. There are 287 city employees, though, who are being green circled in this study, who would not otherwise be receiving an increase to the minimum of the market. So again, you can't look at this from a standpoint, I'm going to go tinker with the top of the range and not think about the full range.
Wait a minute, say that again?
There are 287 city employees in this study who are being adjusted to the minimum of the market range. Some cases, those city employees are making minimum wage. If you look at the 101 pay grade, it's a significant increase for them. So this study is not just saying, let's take care of one end or the other. Let's take care of both in terms of compensation practice. But I think Ms. Long was absolutely on point to say to the suggestion you're making, if council wants to approve a COLA or a lump sum above the range for employees who are topped out, that is a very common compensation practice and one that I support personally.
Can I ask you this? I'm not real sure what you said, but did you say, hold on, were you saying that if we did that at the top end, that we wouldn't be picking and choosing just the top end, but that we had also taken care of the bottom end also? Or are you saying that we need to do something at the bottom end in addition to what we do?
The report does that.
Yes, I thought so too. I
I
thought so too, but I just want to make sure that's what you're saying.
Bottom range, but you're saying, would that require an additional amendment to the study, or how do we
In terms of dealing with our policies, which is what Mr. Lyon has proposed, if we want to look at how we affect in policy those who are at the top of the range or red circled employees, because if you try to adjust what the market comes back to, in essence, you're discounting the market value. But if you are topped out, and we really have to look at that clearly, it's very important to a lot of city employees. We could make a policy recommend to council to say, here's how we address those employees. But the employees below the market right now, with just looking at, changing the top of the scale, wouldn't be the beneficiary of this decision. So again, you've got 287 employees that are in the proposed study that are being adjusted to the market minimums. That's a lot of employees.
But we're not saying either. We're not saying either or. We're saying both.
Well, I didn't hear both in the suggestion to adjust the maximum of the scale, but I could have missed it.
Yeah, we were saying take the study as it's presented, but consider. I think that's what he was saying, was consider increasing the maximum range.
But again, if you don't address both, now you're addressing the market result. So I think that the validity of the market result is what it is. But there is a policy that we can affect by looking, in essence, at those employees who are at the top of the scale. Ms. Long said it in as much as...
But the market range, while I understand that we have selected carefully these cities, and that is deliberate, it is still a shot in the dark. I mean, there's still an estimate. That's all a market study does, is get you within a range. And establishing that range within that is unique to the community that you're bringing it. So you can either hang your hat on the market study and say this is perfect. Well, Burris did a market study, and it's proven that maybe in some instances, a couple of years after that, we found that we needed to go back and revisit it. And we'll probably revisit this one.
Yes.
So it's a moving target when we start talking about that, as far as the saying this is a definitive thing we have to hang our hat on and say this is where we are. If we wanted to make it, tailor this to what we wanted to do and felt was fair to our employees, this would be the time to do it, isn't it? I mean, I think that's what drew me to Rick's suggestion.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Godwin, just so we make sure that we understand, in what you're saying, the 287 employees who the market's moved up, we're bringing them to the minimum. They're coming up. They're getting 287 people. Their salaries are getting brought up.
And that's a total of $431,000.
Right. So, but then the amount of people who are topped out, instead of making that range out of market, is what you're saying, that we would look at the amount of topped out and we would give a one-time, it may be, I'm not saying that speaking for the council, it may be a one-time thing we look at every year at budget, but we would say here's what the increase is for these individuals. It doesn't mean they're working any harder or any less.
Correct.
It just means that they're at the top of their range.
That's right.
We still can give raises. They'll be called cost of living adjustments.
Yes, you can.
Yes, sir.
So
Yeah, but there's a difference in what you're talking about versus what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the people who had their range maximum lowered. It doesn't matter if they're topped out or if they're halfway there or they just got started. The people who had that maximum into their range lowered is all I'm talking about, not for people that are topped out. As far as, I could find you an example if we need to clarify it, but essentially if you have a position that had a $70,000 maximum end of their range under the old policy and it goes to a $69,000 maximum end of their range on this policy, that we would just not do that. I think that's what you guys provided in this handout to us yesterday, which was there were 78 people.
31 positions.
That
78
doesn't have
people.
anything to do with being topped out. That just has to do with that's the number of people that had their maximum range lowered.
Right.
And what I'm suspecting from what I found and just looking through it is that may only affect a a single digit actually people who are actually topped out, who their range actually dropped. And I suspect there are administrative reviews for those people in process.
So you're really talking that somebody went from not being topped out to being topped out.
I'm talking about if they're not topped out now, that they still have a continued longer path.
There's
and
not a
higher
dollar
path.
figure attached to what you're saying, because it's not now, not with this adoption. It would be in the future, because
Yeah,
it would continue
that's
to
right.
have, they would continue to have the ceiling of their maximum where it is now.
That's right.
That's what you're saying.
Well, that's
That's right.
assuming
Unless-
you never did a market survey every 2 or 3 years and changed the range, which is another proposal in the study.
Yeah, and what may happen is in the next 2 or 3 years, they may just catch it right up. So if we don't drop it, we may catch up to that range in 2 or 3 years anyway. So the future cost would be very, very minimal. I mean, this is why I felt like it was a very inexpensive to taxpayer way to continue on with a path that we thought was a fair thing to do for employees, and also kept their sort of our commitment to them when we hired them.
Could you get a dollar figure on that, Mr. Godwin,
I think
for us, of what he's saying, the number of people, and I think it's
78?
30, was how many, 38?
78.
31 job titles
Okay, 30,
impacting
that's where the
78
31
individuals.
I think the only place where you might actually see a current cost is where you have somebody who is really close to topping out and they got adjusted backwards. Somebody was making $68,000, their maximum went from 70 to 69, and so they got a smaller raise. They might get a bigger raise if we chose to plug those numbers in. So there might be some cost to us currently, but I think, like I said, I think that number is going to be very, very small, and I think our future number is going to be very small, but it'll keep kind of the integrity of what, for a little bit of integrity for our employees and a little bit of our hands in it. Eddie?
Mr. Smotherman.
One of the topics y'all been talking about quite a bit, on page 14, item 10, it says pay ranges for city classifications are reviewed as needed but not less than every 4 years. Would you assume that would be done more frequently than every 4 years, or do you think that that's just, as far as these, how often do you think they would be reviewed, the classifications?
Yeah.
Under this
I
study?
don't know that many communities do it every year, but, I think in the policies that we would come back to you, we'd probably want to set 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and use that as our benchmark. Sometimes the market can really change, and that would be a time where you may want to vary from that. But I think having some assurance, because we want to keep this current, we want to make sure that we're still in touch with the market. And 4 years may be a little bit long. I was kind of feeling 2 to 3.
If you were to run into a hyperinflation type situation where you would just see
Correct.
dramatic influxes in salaries, would you? How quickly would that be responded to?
Well, I think that's what the language here is. Pay ranges for city classifications are reviewed as needed.
As needed.
So if something did dramatically change in the market, that would trigger it's time to do one, but not less than so many years. And 2 to 3 probably feels right to me. 4 maybe a little bit long.
So how can we approve, I guess I'm here again confused, this plan without seeing the responses to the questions sent back to the MAG people? I mean, because those are concerns that may change some of these ranges and some of these classifications.
Ms. Harris, the resolution has the council delegate to the city manager the ability to implement those changes without coming back to you. So the employee, they could be dealt with as they arise. The employee wouldn't have to wait. It wouldn't have to be synced with future approval or budget or anything of the council. It would allow for implementation.
But what it also would do is the council's establishing the policy, and you do that all the time. The council establishes policy, and then your city staff carries that out. So, upon approval, we would have a classification system, grade 102, 103, 104. The placement in the grade deals with the JAQ. And so we've used that same process. MAG's going to look at the JAQ, and if it comes back that it's a wrong grade placement, it deserves to be changed. If it comes back with the points were right and it's within the right grade, then the answer is going to be the council set the policy, and that would be the decision.
So what happens, we all have been studying this, and it seems like we learn something more, the more, each time there's something new that pops out, and I'm sure that there will be. What happens to an employee who maybe is learning this and they didn't get that administrative review form filled out and turned in? What happens to that employee then? If there's something they come up and say, wow, I didn't understand it, I do understand it now, this is not right. What happens then?
Mayor, I think we try to communicate far and near about the deadline. I know I had to attend my taxes in yesterday because there was a deadline.
But I got the
But Rob, you took 18 months to compile this study, and we've had it for about 18 days now. I'm not sure that that's fair to the employee to say that this cutoff date is here and you can't come back and review it at some point. I mean,
it is a living document. I think for this initial transition plan, we were trying to get folks to turn them in. We had 200 of them come in.
Right, but I don't mean to cut you off, but 200, that's 12, 13%, and there's a lot of things that we're working on right now that are extremely important in this organization. But I would say that if you ask the employee what's the most important thing that we're working on right now, and they're going to say it's this.
I haven't gotten, let me try to answer the question this way. I haven't had any employees, approach my office, and I don't believe they've approached Mr. Godwin to say, boy, I wished I could have turned one in. I believe we got them from the ones who felt like.
Question. My question is, what happens to the employee that is much like a council member or a mayor that's now getting to understand this process, and all of a sudden they look at something and they go, wow, I understand this. This is not right. So what happens? What's the mechanism then? Hey, wait for 3 years or 2 years until there's another market study. That's what my question is. What would we tell an employee?
In the same way as the staff will be coming to you with policies about what should happen with promotions. I mean, MAG said it should be 5% for any promotion. You may decide you want it to be 6%. Staff can come back to you with a policy recommendation about when and how people can make those requests. Whether or not it's tied to the budget year, whether or not it's tied to if you have approval of your department head, you can do it at any time. I mean, staff will come back to you with policies that will address that, but it was because we wanted to get this piece done, and we couldn't develop the policies until you made a decision about whether this classification approach was acceptable to you. But so I don't think that there's any set answer to that at this point. It was the ARFs were for implementation, for transition. They weren't forever.
But I also think, sorry, Mayor, it may be important to build into the policy in administrative review. What I often see is reclassification. Oftentimes an employee thinks that the position should be reclassified, and if not, one of the things that we could talk about, obviously, would be how that works in a new administrative review process.
Let me just be more blunt. When were the ARFs required to be turned in?
They were actually, I think the 3rd is the deadline that we had for them, and they were completed.
How long had this plan been out when we required people to turn in those ARFs?
They had approximately 2 weeks to return them.
I guess, again, to be blunt, if you had made me give you answers to this plan in 2 weeks, 2 weeks ago, I would have said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So,
did they have 2 weeks? I mean, they had 2 weeks?
It was a one-page form, and they didn't need to do the research. They just needed to simply say, I disagree with my placement in the plan. It was a one-page form that they needed to submit.
I would like to ask that if there's anyone who feels like that they missed out on something, that there's a mechanism that before we implement this, that there's a mechanism that, I'm not saying we open up the ARF format again, but if there's an employee that now is starting to understand this and feels like that their placement's wrong, there needs to be a mechanism that we say, email Mr. Godwin, email your department head, and then, I would think that to our employees, if there's something that we've missed, and Mr. Godwin sees a request to come in and somebody's been placed wrong, that I would think that we wouldn't just say, well, hey, we're going to wait 6-8 months until we get the policies figured out, that we would immediately say that's not right. So
yeah, I've received a number of those requests, Mayor, that are not administrative reviews.
Okay.
Sure.
So I just want to publicly say that we need to be able to say, we don't have to be so rigid with that one thing, that if there's a mistake, we want to fix it.
I agree with that.
And I agree with the mayor. I wasn't going to say anything, but here we go. I'm not ready to move forward on this at all. And as much as I kind of understand it, based upon my experience with my company with the same kind of process, this one has been way more extensive than anything I've ever gone through with the employee input. And you're going to have those 10 to 20% employees that if Jesus Christ puts this thing together, he wouldn't like it. So that's just the way it is, and they out there. That's just the way it is. I like the input. I like the process. the employee involvement, but I'm not there yet as far as giving the employees a little bit more time and give them a little more opportunities to say what they want to say. Because, you know, when you talk about classifying employees, you know, everybody thinks they God's gift to heaven, you know, in a job classification. I hate that, just the way it is. And that's not so. So you know, I think that MAG is doing the best job they can to reclassify and put folks where they think they need to be. I wouldn't get it right if I was doing it. You know, I mean, you know, it's just the way it is. So, but right now, council members, and you do what you want, but I'm not quite there yet.
I'll add a little bit. I'm closer and closer. You know, I think every one of these sessions is good. Every time we've met has been good. Every time I've talked to an employee is good to sort of gather and gain some knowledge about this. I think Eddie said, you know, you guys have got a year and a half in this, and I'm sure feel like you're about ready to get moving on with it. I mean, to me, I would prefer to defer it, and whether that means a week or 2 weeks or something, I apologize to the employees that we might delay getting a raise to, but this is, if it, you know, I'd encourage you not to be in a hurry, or not to encourage us to hurry on this. This is a very, very big project, and I'm much closer than I was even yesterday to thinking we have some of these things ironed out, and in a way that I think one of the difficulties for me is that we have this plan over here and we have policy over here that somehow or another we have to mesh together, that I'm not sure we either address that on the front end well enough, or whether or not we've kind of gotten there quite yet, or what stage we need to be in. But I think after another week or two, we might be able to, you know, some ideas may spring up. So I don't know if anybody wants to make motion to move forward with
and
it,
to piggyback,
go ahead. But
to piggyback off of that, Rick, I think the time we have put into this, the money we have put into this, and I know everybody's not going to be happy, but we're still talking about livelihoods of our employees, and I understand what it is to be on a fixed income. I'm on a fixed income. Unless I get me another job, I'm going to make the same dollar amount forever. But I think it's very important that we not put so much emphasis on the dollar amount as we put on being fair to these employees. I think fairness, we have to be fair. And just listening to everybody, I'm like everybody else so far. I'm not there yet. I'm just not there, because we are dealing, I think we have just, to me, I thought we're just dealing with the salaries and the classifications, but hearing this is just a big bucket of a whole lot of stuff in the bucket. And we are trying to weed out what we're going to do policy-wise versus what the study shows. So I don't want us to be in a hurry. I'm not there yet either.
You're talking about $2.2 million in upfront money plus recurring expenses. So, to me, that's a big deal.
It is.
These are taxpayer dollars.
Right.
You know, I work for Middle Tennessee Electric. I work for the ratepayers. The ratepayers pay my salary. And the taxpayers pay y'all's salary and your benefit packages as employees. So it's not all about us. It's about them too. And sometimes we need to remember that. And that's a lot of money and recurring expenses now. We're talking about retirement, health care, benefits, the whole 9 yards. Because when you start comparing cities to cities, they all have different benefit packages. And the city of Murfreesboro has one of the best benefit packages that I know of outside of my own company. So, you know, you're never going to compare apples to apples. Not going to happen. So I'm just being as blunt as my mayor here said I can be.
Mr. Shackley.
Let me, I think what would be helpful maybe for staff, as it looks like deferment might be an option that we're considering tonight. Direction as to where the questions still remain so that staff can kind of chase wherever those questions are and begin to answer them. I don't have any. I mean, as I look at how the classification part of this, I think we can. I mean, there's a lot of this that I think will be solved in the administrative review process. To me, that's the living part of this document, is that we're going to constantly go back and review and allow that to happen. I think what the mayor said is true, that we need to extend that process and maybe have it'll probably be a regular part of what we do and how we do it. But there's a component of this that we haven't even touched on tonight that I think is going to need some attention for it to solve some concern that I've heard from the employees. And that's, and you reflected upon it when you said we're going to defer this action on the STEP plan, going to an open range plan. We need to have a clearer understanding. When we establish market value, where do we go so that our employees can have reasonable expectations as to what their career is going to result in, how many years it's going to take me to get to a certain place and point. And I'd like to have some clarification that steps are a bad thing if it's a bad thing. I want to understand why it's a bad thing. And if it's not, then clearly look at how steps and some type of adjustment, we've got the adjustment for years, but some type of reasonable expectation for our employees to be able to look at a document and say, in 10, 15 years, I know what my expectations. If I do my job, I contribute, and I keep my nose clean and do the job as I'm supposed to, I have reasonable expectation at this point in time that I'm going to have this kind of income. And I'd like to see, to some degree, as I'm becoming educated on this too, is steps are a part of that, to have expectations. And anyway, that's where my questions are, and there may be others that I think would be helpful to ask, to say where the questions still remain, so that you guys can know what punch list we have presented to you that you need to be answering questions. I think that'd be helpful to staff.
Thank you,
Mr. Smotherman.
And of course, I'm speaking for myself right now. I'm not ready to vote. I'll tell you that. But I will tell you that I'm growing more comfortable with it by the day. And part of that is just the understanding of it. I didn't understand it completely when we got the document, and it's been a learning process. I think our employees are in that same situation. I'm comfortable with the market data that we've got. I think we have done fair on that. I really do. The 43 pay grades, it's a dramatic improvement over where we were. As far as the benchmark positions, I think we may need to look at truly a reduction in some of our positions on the steps, because that would allow us to have greater amount of growth within the positions without having so much overlap. So I think we need to address that. I think we need to continue to get as much information as we can gathered, and I know it's quickly that you can give us as to what direction you think we need to go on this step situation, because I know that's an independent study completely different from where we're at, but in order to approve this, I kind of need to understand what we're going to do with STEP, how that's going to affect what it is that we're approving here. I'm going to go ahead at this point and make the motion that we defer the vote for a minimum of 2 weeks, and that we have another meeting at that point and see if we haven't resolved some of the issues and concerns that we currently have.
Second. And I won't be here on the 30th. I'm telling you right now, I won't be on the 30th. But
A minimum of 2 weeks. It can be more than 2 weeks, but a minimum of 2 weeks, so that we can continue to listen to what the employees are saying and make sure we're not entering an agreement that we're not going to be happy with 2 weeks from now.
We have a motion and a second, and the two questions: is it feasible to have information back by Thursday of a week from today, or is it feasible to say we need to continue to have one-on-one meetings with council with the individual members of city council for the next couple of weeks, and then on May the 7th have another
5:30 meeting?
Another 5:30 meeting, and the meeting that we have on 5:30 would be,
As far as
to answer. That gives staff 2 weeks to try to nail down some of these things, especially if Councilman Smotherman's not Councilman Smotherman, but Councilman Washington won't be here on the
30th.
On the 30th. Will everyone be able to attend a meeting on the 5:30 on the 7th, May 7th? All right, so Mr. Lance won't be here. All right.
Mayor, what I might suggest is, we can, call you all tomorrow and find a date that week of the 30th. It doesn't have to be Thursday night. We can find another day that week. It works for everybody's schedule.
And, if we meet this next Thursday, we still consider, talk about some things. I mean, flat out.
I would like to request that we don't do it during the day.
At 5:30 p.m.?
Yeah, do a 5:30 meeting.
Okay, we'll look for a 5:30 p.m. meeting that, last week of April. See if there's a date that works for everybody.
But don't hold out the 30th. I got to talk to my wife. I promised her something on the 30th. So I can be here, but I can talk to her.
We'll call you tomorrow and find some times.
All right.
Would it be appropriate to send an email to them if we have more
Yeah, and I think, so let's go real quick. We have a motion and we have a second. Ms. Wright, we'll call the roll.
Ms. Gels Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Young.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. And in the meantime, if you have any questions at all, please send those to Mr. Lyons, and then encourage, any more one-on-one meetings with Mr. Lyons or Mr. Godwin, and obviously any employees who have questions, please, let staff or us know about those. So,
And we appreciate the feedback today. I know this is a big decision and a lot of work, and certainly appreciate y'all offering comments and feedback. It's helpful. We all want to live with this and make sure we do the very best job we can. So thank you for your.
we appreciate the hard work that all of y'all are doing. We're going to close this meeting, and then we're going to start the city council meeting at 7:10. Stand adjourned.
eat my dinner.